Welcome to Beer and Bourbon Studios. You are listening to the Game and Drink Connoisseurs podcast. I'm Jessica, and this is my lovely husband assistant, Bryce.
A hubs assistant?
Yes.
What's a hubs assistant?
It's a husband/assistant.
I'm the assistant?
Yes, I'm the magic one.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I guess I will continue to assist you as you lead the rest of this opener.
Today we're going to be talking about the game For Glory by Spearten Games. This is a Gladiator game. It's a deck-building combat game. It's got a really interesting two-phase system. It's a very, very cool game. Really excited to talk about that one today.
And to pair with it, we have Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee. Much like today's game, which is made with a really interesting set of inner workings, Gladiator Glory coffee is also made in a really, really interesting way. So this pairs up not just thematically, but also in the way it's made, which I thought was pretty cool.
We're also going to tell you some interesting facts about gladiators, stuff you probably didn't know, maybe you already did. Hopefully you're going to learn something new today. And then we're going to give you a tip on how you can time your caffeine and coffee intake to avoid that afternoon crash.
So Jess, let me ask you, before doing research for this show, how much did you really know about gladiators?
I mean, I knew about as much as I learned from watching the movie Gladiator.
I think most people are right there. I would say that pirates aside, no other group of people has been more romanticized than the gladiator.
I mean, vampires.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
That's not people. That's a fictional whole thing. So, yes, gladiators. Agreed.
Oh, yeah, they are fake. I'm almost sitting over here like, oh, yeah, good point. Well, I have our first cup of Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee. When we come back, we are going to dive in to For Glory, a deck builder all about gladiatorial combat. But first, let us take a minute to learn a little bit more about Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee.
Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee is an extremely unique single-source enhanced coffee out of Montgomery, Texas. Spearten's goal is a simple one: be the driving force that brings out your inner warrior on a daily basis. The goal may be simple, but their coffee is anything but. Gladiator Glory was designed to, according to Spearten, capture the sweet vanilla taste of victory while appreciating the more bitter, smoky path that led to that win. Using only beans from Honduras gives this coffee an earthy base with sweet and nutty vanilla aromas. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. Gladiator Glory is packed with a multitude of vitamins and supplements, and I do mean packed, from glycine to maca root, zinc, and vitamin B. Gladiator Glory is designed to keep your mind and body fully functional, super sharp, and ready to take on the world. To be honest, we're not really sure what to expect out of this one. It's definitely unlike any other coffee we've come across before, but at $20 per bag, can it truly deliver all that warrior enhancement while still being a good cup of coffee? We'll find out soon enough. In the meantime, if Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee has piqued your interest as much as it did ours, you can check out Spearten's impressively informative website by visiting Spearten.com to pick up a bag of Gladiator Glory for yourself.
In For Glory, you are a Lanista building your gladiator school and clashing against your rival in epic combat. Blood and sweat will spill in the arena while Lanistas pursue their ultimate goal, glory, to be forever remembered as one of the greatest Lanistas of all time. Welcome to the age of the gladiator. For Glory is a game of strategic gladiatorial combat and deck building by Spearten Games and is currently available for pre-order for as low as $45. It is designed for 2 players, plays in around 60 to 90 minutes, and is recommended for ages 14 and up.
For Glory, as we've been saying, it is a very unique deck-building game. It also has a combat mechanic. It's a pretty simple objective. You're trying to become the most revered and legendary Lanista in all of Rome.
And what you do to become the most legendary Lanista in all of Rome, try saying that fast 3 times, You earn money to buy the best fighters and equipment, grease the right palms, and of course, spill blood in epic arena combat without mercy. So let's talk setup. This is a 2-player game. You're going to be head-to-head sitting across from each other, and between you two, you're going to have a couple of different decks laying on the table. You're going to have your economy, your gladiator, and your training deck on one side of you. On the other, you're going to have some coins, some glory and blood tokens. Your last deck is going to go in and near the center of the table. This is going to be your arena deck and your arena area. And it's here where all your battles are going to be fought.
Each player is going to have a player board. They start with some coins and a starting deck. The starting decks are identical. You pick a starting player, draw 7 cards from your starting deck, and begin.
So 4 Glory is broken up into 2 phases. The phase you're going to spend the most amount of time in is the initial phase. This is the Machinations phase. In this phase, you are basically setting yourself up for eventual combat. During the Machinations phase, you're going to be able to play cards from your hand. You can buy different things from the economy and gladiator and training decks. Any new cards will go into your discard pile until you refresh your deck. And then you can also take gladiators you have in your hand and put them into the arena to prepare them for combat.
Let's talk about the types of cards that you can purchase to build your deck. From the economy deck, you can buy cash, schemes, patrons, and influence. So the cash cards are income and coins. They allow you to buy stuff. You play a card that has a monetary value. You can play just the card or a combination of that card and actual coins. There are scheme cards, which are basically special actions. They usually have a cost indicated on the card. They're self-explanatory. The patron cards sometimes have special combat actions. They also usually carry influence, which is something that you need in order to put gladiators into the arena. So as we mentioned, when you purchase a new card, it goes into your discard. But once it comes back around in your hand, you can play these patrons or schemes, and they go into your villa, and they're permanently there, and now you have that influence, which determines how many gladiators you can place into the arena. And once they are in your villa, you're able to tap into their special actions.
The training deck offers a series of offensive, defensive, and counter-combat maneuver cards that can be bought. And if you have them in your hand during combat, you can play them right from your hand to aid your gladiators during fighting. We'll talk more about that later. More than likely, though, what you're going to want to do with these cards is put them in your reserve section of your player board. This allows you to hold on to them off to the side as you cycle through your deck, and they can be retrieved whenever you'd like at the cost of 1 coin per card, and that must be paid in full.
And from the Gladiator deck, obviously, you purchase Gladiators. The gladiators, as we've mentioned before, they have a certain level of influence that they require in order to be played. This is going to be indicated on the card. They also have a level of bloodlust, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, which is also indicated on the card. They have various effects in text on the cards. Some of them have that, some of them don't. But what they all have is an attack value, a health value, and an agility value, which is going to determine how they perform in arena combat.
So players are going to go back and forth, taking turns within every Machinations phase until they have played every card they want to play. Once that happens, each player is going to discard the remaining cards in their hand. They're going to draw up. And once they draw up, they're going to check to see if the combat phase has begun or not. We'll talk more about that in a second. If not, they will just take another Machinations phase and do this until a combat round begins.
So let's talk about the combat phase. This is where all the bloody action takes place. Before we determine if the combat phase begins, we check the bloodlust level versus the boast level. Whew, sorry, this part's just really exciting.
Sunday, Sunday, Sunday.
So you look at the bloodlust level of all of the gladiators that are laid out in the arenas at the moment, and then you compare that to the boast level, which is on the top card of the boast deck, which is to the side of the general central playing area. If the bloodlust is equal to or higher than the boast level, it's time for combat to begin.
At this point, you're going to have a fresh set of cards in your hand, and if there are any gladiators in that hand that you want to put into an arena, you can do this through the process of late registration. You pay 3 coins, and then you can put that gladiator in any arena you want to. You're going to go back and forth with your opponent doing this in case they have any in their hand that they would like to play as well. From there, a round of combat is pretty simple. Each player is going to check their collective gladiator's agility, and whoever has the highest amount will go first. You exchange attacks back and forth. You can apply tactic cards when applicable. You're going to disregard any fallen gladiators and repeat this combat round until somebody wins.
Combat is fought in one arena at a time.
It's always starting with the fleeting arena. Generally speaking, there are 2 fleeting arenas, but you can only fight 1 per combat round. So whichever one has gladiators in it, that's the one you start with. The winner gets glory tokens and a temporary ability, and they get to keep that ability until that particular arena is fought again and the winner changes. So they keep winning, they keep getting to use that ability. Then once the fleeting arena is done, you fight in the lasting arena. This one gives you more glory tokens. It also gives you the boast card and a unique permanent ability that goes in your villa for use throughout the rest of the game. The winner of the game is the first player to be awarded 6 glory tokens. There are no ties. As soon as that 6th glory token is awarded, the game is immediately over. So even if there's another combat that's ready for battle, it doesn't get fought. The champion has already been decided.
All right, so now that we know how to play for glory, let's talk about a few strategies you can utilize to make you the reigning champ. This game has a shit ton of depth, so there is a lot you can do to ensure that you are the victor. The first thing I would suggest is don't overload your deck too much. You want to center your deck around a concise strategy. Too many cards risks not having what you need when you need it. Keep it minimal to maximize the machine you're trying to build. Even if you have to adjust mid-game, always keep what you want to do in mind and try to build and center your strategy and deck around that. You don't want to be overloaded because then you're going to have a bunch of shit you can't use and it's going to fuck you.
Another big strategy is to just be mindful when you're placing your gladiators and also the order in which you're using them to attack. It can make all the difference in a win versus a loss. You want to pay attention to, number 1, where your enemy has placed their gladiators. And think about the text abilities especially. If you can do something to knock out the text abilities or potentially make your opponent use a tactic that they weren't ready to use, it can really make all the difference for you. You also want to use the late registration opportunity tactfully when possible. It can give you a huge leg up when the opponent thought they had that battle. Also, keep in mind which arena fights first as you're placing your gladiators, because that could be important later.
It especially becomes important when you start thinking about your influence, and you definitely want to be mindful and strategic about how you use your influence. First of all, always aim for more influence than you need. Put more senators, or not senators, patrons. Put more patrons into your villa than you need. So if you have gladiators that require, say, 4 or 5 influence collectively, make sure you have 6 or 7 in there because you might want to tap into their abilities. Once you tap into that influence card, the influence goes away, and you can make it so you lose influence to the point where you have to remove a gladiator from combat, and that basically will count as a loss. I mean, there's really no way around that. You also want to watch out for your opponent's special abilities and tactic cards because some of them can take out your influence on their turn. So you definitely want to have more influence than you need in order to survive any attacks directly on your influence from your opponent.
Probably the most important strategy is tactics, tactics, tactics. You want to make sure that you are using tactics, you are collecting tactics, that you are paying attention to the tactics that are out there. They are absolutely key to your victory. Gladiator power and defense is not enough. Those text abilities and the abilities on the schemes and the cards in your opponent's villa, they can really put a damper on your game. So you want to make sure that you have stuff to counter anything they could possibly throw your way, and you also want to be able to throw stuff their way that's going to put a monkey wrench in their strategy. This is a very take that game, so you can't just rely on your stats alone to be stronger than your opponent. You have to be ready to fuck your opponent over and disrupt their strategy as much as you can. You also want to make sure that any tactics you reserve, you're going to be able to afford them when combat rolls around. Because as we mentioned earlier, even though it's only 1 coin per card in your reserve, you have to buy the entire reserve at once. So if you reserve 15 cards and you only have 10 coins, you're shit out of luck and you can't use any of them.
And I just want to take things back to your villa again. Don't forget about your villa, and also don't forget about your arena bonuses. This might just be a me problem because I do this all the time, but in the thick of battle, in the thick of like building up your deck in the machinations phase, it can be really easy to forget that you have these added bonuses and abilities on your senators and your patrons. So don't forget about them. They can really help in a pinch and they can make all the difference.
Another important strategy is to manage the crowd favor token to your advantage. Now, we haven't really mentioned this feature until now, so let me first give you an overview of how it works. The crowd favor token goes to whoever's in last place, meaning whoever has the least amount of glory tokens. And if it's a tie, it doesn't move. So if you lose the first round, you get the crowd's favor token. And if you can manage to keep up with the same amount of glory tokens as your opponent throughout the rest of the game, you keep the crowd's favor token for the rest of the game, because every time it's a tie, it stays with you. This can be a huge advantage because whoever has the crowd's favor token basically controls the start of the arena phase. You don't check the bloodlust until the end of the turn of whoever has the crowd's favor token. It doesn't matter who went first or second, it's the crowd favor that determines when you check the bloodlust. So if your opponent reaches the bloodlust and you have crowd's favor, you still get one more turn to prepare for battle. The crowd's favor token also allows you to go first during the machinations phase, and it acts as a tiebreaker during much of the game.
And last, but definitely not least, you always want to try and reserve at least some physical coins for emergencies. There are two ways to pay for things in this game. You have cards that you can buy that are worth a certain value in coins, and then you have the physical coins themselves. Coin cards run the risk of being discarded when you need them the most, if an arena phase were to start, etc. So think of your physical coins as gold to back your paper money. These things will help with exact change, or they will help in a pinch. Say you lost a coin card you really needed, bam, you have physical coins that you can lean on. And it's also important to have cards in your deck that give you physical coins for said situations. Wow, this game has a lot of depth. That's a lot of strategic goodness right there.
Oh yeah, that might be an understatement. This game is chunky. Let's take a little bit of a breather here and learn some fun facts about gladiators and gladiatorial combat.
When we come back, we will be discussing likes, dislikes, what other people said, as well as taking a brief look at the expansion content available for 4 Glory today.
While combat sports are about as old as human civilization, gladiatorial combat, which is specifically Roman, is probably what we all think of most. The first gladiatorial games took place during the funerals of wealthy and prominent landowners. This practice was likely taken from the Etruscans who lived in that region in Italy before Rome became the empire we know of today. The greatest symbol of arena combat is undoubtedly the Colosseum. From the completion of its construction in 81 AD until Rome switched to Christianity in 380, gladiatorial games were taken to unprecedented heights, involving anything from hand-to-hand combat and even reenactments of naval battles. Gladiatorial contests were surprisingly safe given their brutal nature. From a business perspective, this made a lot of sense. Being slaves as they were, gladiators were very costly investments, and a lanista couldn't possibly profit if his gladiators died quickly or often. Because of this, gladiatorial training was done with wooden weapons, and gladiators were taught to injure rather than kill. There were often referees during matches to ensure death blows weren't inflicted, and gladiators were known to unionize for, essentially, health benefits. With all that said, it was still very brutal and violent. While only 1 or 2 out of 10 bouts ended with death in the arena, many gladiators would die of their wounds hours or days later. The average gladiator died within the first 2 years of their career, which was far from the required amount of time needed to put in to earn their freedom. Most people's general knowledge of gladiators likely comes from the 2000 film Gladiator, and while the movie does get a few things right, for instance, the Emperor Commodus really did fight in rigged matches in the Colosseum, and there were a fair share of female gladiators, it also got a lot of things wrong, most notably the idea of thumbs up meaning let them live and thumbs down meaning let them die. This was actually not a very common practice at all, but when it did happen, the reverse was more likely, as in thumbs up meant let him die, and vice versa. Also, it wasn't the emperor who usually decided a gladiator's fate, but rather the head referee. Probably one of the more surprising aspects of ancient gladiators is their diet. For the most part, they were vegetarian. More than 80% of their meals consisted of barley porridge and beans. The reason why is pretty simple. They were slaves, with a short life expectancy, and this was the cheapest way to feed them. Gladiators are probably one of the strangest group of people in written history, not only for their trade, but also due to their unique status in Roman culture. On one hand, they were slaves, fed poorly, housed in disgusting conditions, and often given violent and brutal deaths for the entertainment of crowds and financial benefit of their enslavers. At the same time, they were often the most celebrated, popular, famous, and revered people in all of Rome. So much so that ballads would be made in their honor. Toys and costumes would be made in their image for kids to play with. Their sweat and blood would be used and drank as an aphrodisiac. Wealthy men, emperors included, would pay large sums of money to compete as gladiators themselves in order to obtain their unique level of admiration. The Emperor Nero was such a fan of one particular gladiator that he requested him to be the man who killed him once he was cornered by his would-be assassins. Gladiators were also massive sex symbols whose prowess was irresistible, even to the wives of emperors. It has long been suspected, even in his own time, that Commodus, who we mentioned earlier, was actually not the son of Marcus Aurelius, but rather of a famed gladiator with whom his mother had an affair. The term rock star doesn't even begin to encapsulate what gladiators were to Roman society, even though they were expendable slaves. A rather curious set of circumstances, to say the least.
So I think it's fairly safe to say that Jessica and I are big fans of this game, so let's get the dislikes out of the way first. Jessica, for me, there aren't many things I dislike, but one of them is I'm not thrilled about the multiple versions. The whole standard versus deluxe, I know it's a very common thing with crowdfunding. Although the versions are similar enough, I think the deluxe brings more out of the game. I think it feels more real. You got metal coins, you got metal swords, you got that metal gladiator helmet. It completes the game. I think it makes the standard in comparison look and feel incomplete. I think the deluxe version, considering this is a second printing of this game and it was going to do well, I think it should have been a stretch goal rather than a tier. I get why that's risky, but because it's a second printing, I think it could have done it, and I think it could have done it with a lot of room to spare financially.
I have mixed feelings about that. We ended up with the deluxe version because we bought this game secondhand.
Yeah.
And we love it. It's amazing. It impacts our feelings about the game greatly. But normally we would have bought the standard version. So I don't know. I wonder if the deluxe was all that was available, if we would have paid the higher price point.
Well, if it was a stretch goal, it would have come included as a standard, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't change the way the game plays. It just, for me, it changes the way it feels.
Absolutely. It's really just aesthetically, it brings it home and makes it really fantastic and thematically fun. For me, the one thing I don't love about this game is that the crowd favor token offers a possibly unbalanced advantage. I can see why it's there to help the player in the last place, but I think it might be too helpful. In our case, it tends to create a slingshot effect, especially if it doesn't move during a tie or because of a tie. And that happens a lot with us.
It does. And I noticed when we were playing it, it doesn't move much after the first round. And the winner tends to be whoever has it at the end of the game. So if you lose strategically to get the helmet away from whoever started with the game, it's really easy to hold on to it. And you're right, it does create an imbalance.
And maybe that's just our experience. We've played this game a bunch of times, and it kind of always seems to happen that way. Maybe that's just us, but it seems to be kind of imbalanced.
Another thing I was kind of not too thrilled about was there wasn't a lot of ways to call cards and keep your deck nice and thin and concise. There's only one card that does this, but usually, because it's a card that has a double effect, you either get rid of a card in your deck or you collect 2 coins. Usually, you're collecting 2 coins. Aside from getting rid of the boast cards that you win as you win combat, which do nothing for your deck except take up space, the secondary option I usually tend to prefer.
I agree. I am very rarely bothering with getting rid of cards, although, as you said, those boast cards, because they literally just take up space and don't do anything, they become very annoying once you have them. It can leave you with not much to do after you have a good system in place, and it becomes kind of risky to add more cards to your deck.
Yeah, because if you already have a nice machine going, adding another card might get in the way of the machine, and then it could, again, like we've talked about, is very take that game. It's very much like screw each other over as fast as you possibly can. It could be a wrench in your works.
It might not be that big of a deal because the game usually only lasts 3 to 4 rounds. But for us, we've found ourselves in a situation where you're in one of the later combats where it's a lot more at stake. and you don't have access to the cards that you purchased for this very moment.
To be fair, it could just be because I suck at drafting the right things, but in deck builders and things that, especially with games where decks are like constantly being shuffled and reused and cards are being added, it would have been cool to see a way to take more cards out.
And now that bummer fest is out of the way, let's talk about what we like about this game. And there is a lot to be liked about this game. It is thematically amazing. It really feels like you're a Lanista. You're buying gladiators, you're bribing for influence. The only thing that's really missing is an emperor element, but that's probably just because I watched the movie Gladiator. Because in real life, as we learned from the facts that we heard a few minutes ago, the emperor didn't really have that much to do with the gladiatorial combat.
Not often, unless you're Commodus, that fucking maniac. Yeah, thematically it's great. I just can't say enough about how thematically solid it feels. Everything you do is to build your school up, and then the combat gets really intense as well because it's like, oh, take that, oh, take that. I also love the mechanisms and strategic depth here. They're just absolutely incredible. This two-phase system of like setting up and going back and forth until you get to the fight, and then the fighting itself, I haven't seen anything like that in any other deck builder. Granted, I haven't played a lot of deck builders, but this is a pretty unique system from what I understand.
I haven't seen anything like it, and I love it. I think that it really brings a lot of timing and tactical elements into play. It brings it really to another level. There's so many different ways to play and different strategies that you can adapt, especially with the ways that the different text abilities on the gladiators and the different tactics kind of work together or kind of against each other.
Right. There's a ton of options and combos you can try. You're going to be doing this again and again and getting something different every time. I also think that all these abilities and stats between the cards, they're very balanced. Sometimes when you have all these abilities and all these combos, you run the risk of breaking the game in some way or another. We were fortunate enough to be able to talk to the designer himself, and he told us it took him 3 years to figure out this balance, but time well spent because there is not a single combo we have seen yet that breaks the game in any real significant way. There is always something to counter it, and there's always something to tweak to make it a little stronger, but then counter it again. It really does make for a fantastic combat situation. The duplicate ratio is also super balanced here. There's not too much of any one given card, and if somebody takes a card you really need, there's just enough copies of it in any of the given decks for you to see it again relatively quickly.
All of that leads to just insanely high replayability. This game, I feel like you could play it hundreds and hundreds of times and still get something out of it because, as you said, it's balanced, it's full of different strategies and combinations, and there's just always new things to discover and learn every time you play. The artwork is also amazing. It's violent, it's gory. If that's not for you, I get it, but for us, it's awesome. It's thematically on point. It's guys getting speared, it's blood all over the rulebook. They didn't really shy away from reality. I mean, this is what Rome looked like in gladiatorial times, and we love that. The designer, he said he went back and forth on how violent he wanted to make it, and he feels like he reached a happy medium, and I couldn't agree more personally.
Agreed. The cards where guys are getting speared in the chest, it's like, oh, that's fucking brutal, but it is awesome. Now, we had mentioned the deluxe edition versus the standard edition. We have the deluxe edition, aesthetically amazing, thematically fitting, and it's very functional within the game. Nothing is there to be like shock and awe value. It all fits. It all looks right. It all feels right. There's nothing lacking. Again, that's just the deluxe version, but the components in the deluxe version were definitely worth mentioning.
When we asked others about this game, it's pretty much on par with what we like about the game. It's popular among the people who tried it. They love it for the same reasons we do. There's a lot of love out there for the components, especially the little gladiator helmet, which serves as the crowd favorite token in the deluxe edition.
Yeah, this is a game still being crowdfunded, even though this is the second printing. It hasn't seen a lot of people's tables yet, so that's probably why you don't hear a whole lot about the game yet, but I do predict you will.
Now for something completely different.
Or at least new.
This section that we haven't really talked about before, probably because we haven't really done a game that's being crowdfunded before. But we felt it's important for us to talk about the different options that you're going to see available when you go to pre-order this game. As we've mentioned a bunch of times, there is the standard version and the deluxe version. The deluxe version includes the metal components that we raved about. That's the coins are metal instead of cardboard. You also have the metal gladiator helmet that serves as the crowd's favor token, and little metal swords that go on your arenas to differentiate the abilities that go back and forth. The difference in price is only $15, and for us, we absolutely recommend it. We think it's worth it to get the higher quality components. It really makes the game aesthetically and thematically.
Now, let's talk about expansions. This is called the Champions expansion, and there are a bunch of extra things you get that can help enhance your game. First of all, you get a 4-player and solo option. The solo option comes with kind of like I always use video game terms, like a computer opponent. There's a gladiator, he's got his own deck, and as he draws things out, you got to fight against him. And then there's the 4-player mode, which will obviously allow 4 people to play. Before, you needed 2 copies of 4 Glory. Now you can just have it in one game. There's some additional elements to potentially enhance your gameplay, such as like different tokens and cards and things, but most notably the champion cards, which will level up your gladiators as you go. So you take them, you put them to the side, and then as the game goes, you can level them up, and then you can bring them back into the arena, really strong and really powerful, and that stands out to me as the most interesting.
And I think it's worth noting that the cards themselves, even in the base game, are good quality. You don't need to sleeve them. You can play with them. They're easy to shuffle, easy to handle, and they don't get easily bent or messed up.
So to wrap it up, I would call 4 Glory a very clever, thematic, and tactical game. There's a lot to take that, which I know not a lot of board gamers are fans of, but I think it's done so in a way that puts more emphasis on the tactical than the actual take that, so I think people are going to have a lot of fun with it. The price seems initially steep, but you get a lot for your money. It will pay for itself in no time. The expansions, if this is your first time playing 4 Glory, I would say they're not necessary. If you already have 4 Glory, you might want to check them out.
As we said, this is an extremely unique deck builder. This game will make you a better gamer, and it's going to be something you enjoy for years to come.
So I know that I've said this before, and I will probably undoubtedly say it again, but this one might be the most unique, strangest brew we've come across yet.
It's certainly the most interesting coffee.
Yes.
In that it's the only one we've covered which has added vitamins and other things in it to benefit you nutritionally.
I've actually never heard of another coffee that does this at all.
It's becoming a trendy thing. You see it a lot in the aisles of Sprouts and that kind of place. There's a lot of coffees that are entirely, made with mushrooms and...
Well, I've heard of that stuff, but like a hybrid of like coffee and vitamin supplement, that's entirely new to me. But maybe I just don't shop at Sprouts as often as you do.
Yeah, I've started to see the hybrids pop up, I think, as kind of a solution to okay, well, you don't need to get rid of coffee because it tastes delicious, but maybe we'll add these other things to make it less problematic.
Well, if it was one of those quote-unquote coffees that was just a bunch of ground-up mushrooms, I got to tell you, we probably wouldn't be talking about it on this show because I only want to talk about coffee when we're talking coffee. That just doesn't strike me as coffee. What I will say about this, though, is I was very curious to see how they would pull this off because it's not just a single-source coffee, which, people with single sources, some people like it. You really get the full flavor, the one bean. There's nothing in there to counterbalance it at all, so you're really relying on that flavor a lot. But also with Gladiator Glory, you now have a supplement drink in there as well. And I've been into many vitamin stores and stuff. I don't like the smell of those supplement stores, so I was worried it would translate into this coffee. But I gotta say, it didn't do that.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect with this one. I'm not quite as anti-mushroom coffee or whatever as you are, but I was definitely expecting a weird flavor and smell. I don't know what a GNC smells like, but definitely thought the additives would do something weird to it.
So you have your bag of Gladiator Glory, you open it up, and you get a whole lot of vanilla in the aroma. right away, which made me think that it was a flavored coffee, but it's not. It's just that Honduran bean and that vanilla really coming out.
It definitely has a strong vanilla aroma. It smells almost sweet as well, which is not what you'd normally smell in a coffee, but it's very pleasing.
Now, the important thing, taste. Let's talk flavor. Jessica, what did you think of this coffee flavor-wise?
My initial thought was it doesn't taste like a bold roast to me. It tastes more like a light roast or almost like a tea. Like it's a very thin flavor, if that makes sense.
I actually don't agree. I think the boldness and the bitterness and the earthiness of the beans that you usually associate with the dark roast come out. I think with light roast you get a lot more acidity. And granted, there is a little more acidity in here than normally because it's a single bean coffee. That usually happens when you just roast a coffee using just one type of bean. But I think there's a good amount of earthy, smoky flavor in here. I really do.
Yeah, maybe it is just the acidity for me that's making me think light roast. There's the vanilla that we talked about that's really strong in the smell. And I also get a little bit of cinnamon.
Interesting. I found it to be bold and earthy with a lot of smoke. And then as the sip goes down, you get some vanilla aroma in your mouth. But then there's an aftertaste I can't quite put my finger on. And you thought it was the maca root that's in here.
Yeah, I do. I've had maca root in actually a coffee substitute that used to be around like a decade ago and doesn't exist anymore. And it was mostly maca, and I really liked it. So I don't know, maybe it was something else in the blend that I'm finding familiarity with here. But for me, I think it's the maca root that's giving it that aftertaste. It's got a very earthy, almost chocolatey flavor.
I originally thought that aftertaste we're talking about might be from all the supplements in it because, again, the vitamin store, the smell, but it's not bad. It's just very unique.
It's definitely a very complex combination of flavors, and it's not quite coffee. I mean, it is, but if you're tasting it black for the first time, you might be like, huh.
Do you think this would turn off coffee purists? Because they do exist. I know that sounds funny, but like people are just like, I just want a cup of black coffee in the morning. Fuck the cream and sugar. Fuck all that. Just give me black coffee. Do you think this would turn them off?
Maybe. I mean, I think it depends on what they're looking for. If you're going for just flavor alone, I doubt you'd even be wanting to try something with all these added things. But if you're really looking for the added benefits that this coffee claims, then I think it's pure enough in its flavor that it's worth it.
So normally what Jessica and I like to do is try whatever brew we're talking about on the show for the first time while we're recording, so we can give you initial thoughts. Pretty fun for us to do that way. With Gladiator Glory, however, because of this additional thing that they have going on where there's a lot of energy boosting supplements within the coffee, we went ahead and tried it a few times throughout the last, I'd say, week or two?
Mm-hmm.
So we could see if the effects really do kick in. But let's talk about these added effects. Let's talk about what makes Gladiator Glory really, really unique. All these energy boosting supplements inside the coffee. Would you say you felt it at all?
Yes, I would. It's not like a magic potion, where you feel like you're on speed. But, or I don't know if speed would be the thing, but...
I could tell you, but that's a show for a different day.
For the record, I don't know what it feels like to be on speed. But it's nice. There's definitely a clarity and a sharpness, and it doesn't give you the jitters and the kind of racing heart rate, like yuckiness that you get from caffeine by itself.
The back of the bag says it has over 3,000% of your daily vitamin B, and I think that has a lot to do with the clarity you're feeling. I also do feel a difference after drinking this coffee.
It's definitely effective for what it claims to be. And what I love about it is I've tried a ton of coffee alternatives, and the alternatives, they don't taste good, and they don't work or XYZ, lots of reasons. But this particular combination of coffee with the added vitamins is fantastic because I get the flavor of coffee and I actually feel pretty good and energized, which is what caffeine was supposed to do for me, but I sadly haven't had that forever,
So let's wrap this up. Jessica, what is your final analysis on Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee?
I would say for the benefits of it, if you're looking for something that's going to be more beneficial than caffeine, I would say absolutely, it's fantastic. It does what it advertises, and it doesn't compromise flavor. If you're a coffee purist, maybe this isn't for you.
And I would say this is definitely a coffee worth checking out. If you're a coffee purist, I still think you should give it a try because, like Jessica said, it doesn't compromise on flavor. If you like earthiness, if you like smokiness, this is going to be right up your alley. This is a coffee that allows you to really take your time with it and experience how much coffee can actually do with all these energy boosting supplements in it. Given that coffee is enjoyed by people for energy, I think if you're looking for something super adventurous that's not going to stray too far from what we know coffee to be, this is worth a try. I recommend Gladiator Glory by Spearten. Jess?
I recommend it. Definitely bring it to your next very long game day.
Oh, absolutely. For all those freaks out there who like sitting at a table for 12 hours playing Twilight Imperium 4, this coffee is going to do you a lot of good.
Or if you want to just be super alert against your opponent while playing for Glory, definitely give Gladiator Glory by Spearten Coffee a try.
Hey, it's Bryce here with Just the Tip. Brew, food, and mixology suggestions for a better drinking experience. Today's brew is a coffee all about maximizing energy to get through the day in glorious gladiatorial fashion. But as synonymous as coffee is with a morning boost, it is equally tied to the dreaded afternoon crash. And I got some bad news for you. That 2 p.m. cup of coffee isn't actually going to help. In fact, you've already set yourself up for failure this afternoon when you had your first cup of coffee in the morning. Today, we're going to explore why as well as ways to prevent it. Now, of course, you don't have to take my advice. Everyone likes their brews in their own way. That's why this is Just the Tip. Along with caffeine, the afternoon crash has everything to do with two naturally occurring chemicals in your body, cortisol and adenosine. Without getting too lost in the chemistry, your body produces adenosine to make you drowsy. Caffeine works as a stimulant which blocks adenosine receptors, causing you to feel more awake. And cortisol is your body's natural stimulant spiking at various times throughout the day that essentially eats away at the adenosine, causing you to not just feel awake, but be awake. So here's what happens. Drinking a cup of coffee right when you wake up in the morning blocks your adenosine receptors before your first cortisol spike. Your body, however, is still producing that adenosine, building up behind the caffeine, leaving nothing for your cortisol to fight off when it finally does peak for the first time, leaving your natural energy production in a weakened state. Now, let's fast forward to around 2 p.m. when the caffeine finally starts to wear off. All that built up adenosine is now surging through your body, causing your eyelids to get impossibly heavy. And while the next cup of coffee will once again block those receptors, it also renders your late-day cortisol spikes less effective, creating the same issue for you the following morning. Okay, so now that we're aware of the problem, let's talk about the solution. It all comes down to timing. By waiting to have your coffee until after your body's daily cortisol spikes, you'll maximize and even enhance your energy levels. Your cortisol will have gotten rid of all your adenosine right as the coffee comes in to block the receptors. Naturally speaking, our peak cortisol levels occur between 8 and 9, 12 and 1, and 5:30 and 6. So ideally, you'll want to drink your first cup of coffee at around 10, with additional cups around 3 and maybe 7:30, although I'd personally skip that last one. Of course, everyone is wired a little bit differently depending on a number of factors, mostly having to do with what time you wake up in the morning. Whenever that is, as long as you wait around 90 minutes before your first cup with about a 4 to 5 hour gap between your next one, you should be fine. While this may be a difficult adjustment, it's definitely a worthwhile one. Properly timing your caffeine intake will not only give you more natural energy all day long, but will also help eliminate your caffeine addiction, as you'll no longer be chemically reliant on your coffee, meaning you'll get to enjoy your coffee for its flavor and complexities rather than need it to stay awake. My name is Bryce, and this has been Just the Tip.
That's all for today. Join us next time at Beer and Bourbon Studios as we take a look at the downfall of Pompeii. Another fucked up story of ancient Rome.
Yeah, we're keeping it in ancient Rome. If you like the show, if you find it to be entertaining, you know what to do. Like us wherever you follow us. Subscribe wherever you're listening. Give it a 5-star review. 5 stars is the only acceptable number of stars that we will allow. And most importantly, share it with your friends. We will catch you next time.
Bye-bye!